Welcome to episode 13 of The Catch-Up, a podcast from the Daily Catch where we take you inside the news. My name is Walter Mullen, and I'm the publisher of the Daily Catch.
And I'm Emily Sachar, the editor of the Daily Catch.
In this podcast, we discuss stories that have appeared in the Daily Catch. We give you insights into how we put the stories together, offer additional observations, and discuss where these stories may be heading as we move forward. Emily, I think it's time to get our listeners all caught up. Do you agree?
Catch them up. Let's catch them up.
So our first topic is going to be kind of a fun, very interesting story that surprised me when I saw it. We're calling this the cold case in Red Hook. Can you explain what's going on here?
Yeah, it surprised me too, Walter. I got a tip actually last Monday morning that a large group, a swarm of state police were sitting at the northern end of Spring Lake, which is just at the edge of Upper Red Hook. And what were they doing? Well, we didn't know. And then I checked the state police website, and they had blasted a large meme across the front of their Facebook page saying that they were going to have a large coterie of people up at Spring Lake on Monday morning investigating an old case, a cold case that had gone warm, or they actually said hot. I think that was their wording. So we rushed over there. I got in my car. I dropped everything I was doing because how fun to be at the scene of something like that. And I chanced upon 17 scuba divers, all dressed in their togs, and the chief investigator for the case, senior investigator Matthew Radowitz. And he told me that about 8 months ago, they had gotten a tip, and using DNA analysis and all kinds of other high-tech tools that are now available to the state police and the sheriff's office, they were reopening the case and trying to get more information. And while they wouldn't tell us exactly what they were doing out on the lake, it was clear they were looking for something. And what would they be looking for? We presume it was a weapon. Of course, we don't know that. We don't have any evidence at all of what they were looking for. They were using a grid search pattern. So they had people going in at one section and then rolling along a certain stretch of the grid, getting out with all of their bindings, which largely included muck from the bottom of the lake, and cataloging it and then getting back in, or another team would then get back in and go in for another hour, hour and a half and come back. So it was very interesting. The case...
Let's back up and tell people about the crime that took place 30 years ago.
Yeah, 31 years ago, a gentleman named Brian Charles Burton, who was a radio and TV ad salesman, an advertising salesman, was shot in the body 5 times and found in an old Toyota very near the northern end of the lake. And the case apparently went cold almost immediately. They never had a suspect, or the people they interviewed all had alibis. So the case just went quiet. I mean, things were very different back then. There were the kinds of tools that investigative teams had were quite limited by comparison to what they have today. So we don't know exactly why the case was reopened. It was part of something called the Hudson Valley Cold Cases and Missing People website. The family has been very eager for this case to be resolved. At the time, there were some rumors that are hard to repeat, but that Mr. Burton had been involved in perhaps a gambling ring or a drug ring, and the family very much wants to clear his name. He was a father of 4 children, a son and 3 daughters, 34 years old, as I mentioned at the time. So a lot of interest, renewed interest in the case. I think also, in a small town, those kinds of cases kind of never die. And what the police told me, what Mr. Radowitz told me, is there were still people living on Spring Lake who lived there at the time of the killing. So their work last Monday included not just scanning the lake, but they apparently went out and just blanketed the area with people to do interviews. And there were a huge number of police officers there. I can't tell you how many, but dozens and dozens of people there.
Why do you think they would put so many people on this?
It's very hard to know. First of all, you need to put a large number of scuba divers on a team like that because the divers have to take breaks. So you can't put a diver in and then let him go right back out. He builds up carbon dioxide and so forth. So they had teams working in groups of 2, and then they had people on the shoreline grabbing the evidence and giving directions. So it was a very precise kind of operation. And then maybe they just want to do it all at once, because if you have new evidence and something comes up, you don't want a lot of rumors to start right then. So you want to, as law enforcement, you want to target things and do very quick, expeditious work. So once they were in the area, they wanted to make sure that they could, I imagine, find whatever they thought they were looking for. Now, they had expected that perhaps they would have something on Tuesday morning, because they told us on Monday they couldn't tell us very much about what they were doing, and they would tell us more on Tuesday. But then when Tuesday came out, nothing else came along. There was a very nice video that Mr. Radowitz, dressed in a suit and tie, standing at the lakefront, gave out to the community. But it was mostly just call us with tips. Call us at our tip line if you have anything to tell us.
You talked about the difference of investigating a crime today versus 30 years ago. And in my mind, the biggest difference was in 1993, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have the internet. So there's no digital trail, whereas today, the digital trail is often the most important.
Yeah, I mean, even to the point that you can put today, if you're in the middle of a crime, you can put out an SOS alert on your phone, right? So they could have perhaps gotten to the scene much more quickly. It's not just the investigation of the crime, it's actual crimes unfold in a very different way today than they might have back then. So we just don't know, and hopefully we will get some answers eventually. And it was really exciting to see our state police out there, and I was also very impressed by how open they were to the press being there. I was the only person there when I was on the scene. There were no other media there. They were very forthcoming to me. They were very helpful. They allowed me to take photographs. The idea of a big yellow cordoned off area was not the way this went down. It was really, really quite lovely and quite interesting.
Let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think people have this image of you rushing up in your car and you're screeching your brakes and jumping out and flashing your press badge and then having words with the chief. Does it work that way? How do you insinuate yourself in the process?
Well, I did have my press pass on, and I did drive my car up. I don't think I drove quickly, but I drove pretty expeditiously to get up there. I didn't slam on my brakes, but I did put my brakes on, and I jumped out of the car pretty quickly. And I then went up to the public information officer. I quickly identified that there was a public information officer at the scene. And then I asked to speak to the chief investigator. I asked if I could walk the scene, and they just kept saying, sure, sure, sure. So every now and then one of the scuba divers would say, don't take a picture of me. But other than that, they were very eager to be part of it. And I think it was exciting for them. Something we often don't realize, and we often, I think, take for granted, is that it's exciting sometimes for the people on the other side of the camera and the other side of the interview to participate and to have their work recognized.
Yeah, exactly.
They often, don't get that. They often have to, when they're investigating a crime that's hot, they often have to deflect police, or I should say deflect media involvement or media participation, because they have a job to do. But in that moment, they were very open.
So just to look ahead, what are we expecting to hear, and when are we expecting to hear something?
We just don't know. We'll just have to wait and see if maybe there'll be a break in the case. Maybe they found something. Maybe they'll take whatever they found back to their lab. They seem to be very focused on a specific portion of the lake. Spring Lake is quite a long lake, runs for well over a mile. They were very much engaged in a specific section looking for something. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Do we have any perspective on how big a story this was in 1993? I mean, it sounds like it was a tremendously big story for Red Hook.
That's a really interesting question. I was not able to find a lot of information about it. And interestingly, the obituary for Mr. Burton didn't even mention that he was murdered. So it just sounded like he died, right? Just a natural death. He would not have known. So it was very hard to find clips. I think I found one clip from the time. So it may have been closely followed, but there have not been a lot of media outlets in this community for a long time, hence the Daily Catch.
But if something like this happened today, it would be massive news.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And we would probably have the Kingston Freeman on it, but we don't have a lot of media up here. Maybe the Albany Times-Union would jump on it. It's not really clear why there wasn't more media attention at the time.
And does the victim's family still live in the area?
Some of them do. I don't know about all of them. And one of his sons has written about it fairly extensively and posted a long message about it on Facebook. He's apparently written a self-published book that one can get on Amazon about the crime and the impact on his family.
Well, we'll keep everyone informed going forward. It's an interesting story.
Yeah. A big crime week this week, or there were several
Yeah.
crime stories in the
So
world.
let's jump over to our second topic, which is another crime story in Rhinebeck. Joseph Dalu, who was the owner of Le Petit Bistro in Rhinebeck, a popular restaurant, was at the heart of another crime story. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, and this story is interesting for a couple of reasons, not only because we're going to tell you about the alleged crime, but also because the Daily Catch became part of the story, something we never really want to have happen. We just want to report the news. But our choices about how to cover the story elicited a fair amount of public comment. So Joseph Dalu, the well-respected owner of Le Petit Bistro, was arrested after an incident that happened on July the 3rd. So that was last Thursday, a week ago Thursday, that apparently involved an altercation with a chainsaw. And we don't know, or I don't know, somebody does, whether Mr. Dalu had the chainsaw or whether he was in an altercation with someone else, a neighbor who had a chainsaw. I've heard different stories, sort of rumors through the grapevine. The police did not indicate who the altercation was with. And so we don't know. And we are not law enforcement. So it's not on us, I don't feel. And it's probably dangerous for us to research the details of what happened. But nonetheless, Mr. Dalu was arrested and charged with 2 misdemeanors, one of which was not only that he brandished a weapon, but that he apparently did something called racking the weapon, which is like pulling back, as I understand it. I'm not a gun person, but pulling back in a way that makes a threatening sound to the other person, right? It's kind of a warning, like, don't get close to me. And that is also a crime, a misdemeanor. So each of these is punishable by up to a year in prison, or I should say a year in jail, because you wouldn't go to state prison for those misdemeanors. He was supposed to be back in court last Thursday. So exactly a week later, on the 10th of July, I went to the courtroom and I was told the case has been postponed till at least August. So we don't know what has happened since then. Sometimes when you have an arraignment like that or a second court appearance like that, you will have a chance to talk to the state police. But in this case, because it's an ongoing crime or an ongoing investigation, I would have anticipated that it would have been very difficult to talk to the state police about their findings. They release what they are willing to release to the public. And I also was not hopeful or optimistic that Mr. Dalu would speak to us or that his attorney would, because you don't want to give up evidence at that point. In general, you want to protect your client. Often in a case like this, when a defendant makes their second court appearance following an arraignment, it's very difficult to get anybody to talk to you. Lawyers want to protect their clients. Clients don't want to speak to the media. So one of the questions that the community has raised is, why haven't we gone to the scene to investigate for ourselves? So we can talk a little bit about the community reaction, if you'd like, Walter.
Before we do that, I'd like to turn back the clock a little bit, because Joseph Dalu was in the news previously for another situation, which I think we have to just touch upon. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, sure. So you'll recall that after the October 7th attack on Israeli civilians, when some number over 1,000 people were killed, there were then attacks on the Gaza Strip by the Israelis, thousands and thousands of people killed there. Last May, so a year ago, May 2024, there was a protest in the village of Rhinebeck. On one side were people that had been in part organized by Mr. Dalu, we were told, and he hosted a breakfast that was embraced by people who were very opposed to the Israeli actions. And then on the other side of the street, opposite the restaurant, were a group of people supporting the actions of Israel. It was a peaceful protest, but Joseph Dalu was at the center of one side of that protest and wanted to be, right? Wanted that recognition, that involvement. And it was covered not just by us, it was covered by, at the time, the Hudson Valley Pilot, under Eric Steinman covered it. The Kingston Freeman covered it. There were several other media outlets that covered it. So it became part of Mr. Dalu's biography, as it were. In journalism, we often will summon facts from other stories when we are talking about a person who has made themselves part of the public story. So there are all kinds of public figures. There's limited public figures, full public figures, politicians, people who own businesses, who do things that make them part of the public fabric of their communities. And Mr. Dalu is one such individual. Often with great respect, he's in that role. But that was very much a part of the biography that we felt was important to remind people of it. And the reason we do that, I just will add, Walter, is that we serve as a sort of shorthand for the community. We give people what they need to know or what we think they need to know, so that they don't have to go back and look in the clips. We can just say, here's kind of the key things you need to know about this person. And it's a shorthand that the community relies on us for all the time. We do it in stories in many different ways. We will bring people up to date. In case you haven't read the 15 stories about the turf field in Red Hook, here's a 2-paragraph summary of what's happened, right? And that's a very important role that we serve, in addition to bringing the news to people, is to bring them what they may have missed, right? Why is this person important? And it helps explain the news coverage that we are choosing to do every single day of the year.
So now let's talk about the reader reaction to the story.
Yeah, so I was actually surprised to some extent by how vociferous some of the reaction was. Reaction on both sides, but people had very strong opinions about the fact that Mr. Dalu was involved in this altercation. And then they had feelings about our choice to cover it in the first place. Some people felt that we shouldn't have even reported it out, right? It's a private altercation, they said. Other people felt that we should not have resurrected the story about the protest, with which I disagree, and so do members of our advisory board. And they were also upset that we didn't talk in a more glowing way about Mr. Dalu, which is, again, also not our job. So there were many feelings, and some of the complaints were so strongly worded that I felt it was important for us to come out to the community and explain why we did what we did. Not to defend it, but just to explain to people, here's how I'm thinking. And here is how we are working on things like this kind of story. And I think one thing we haven't talked about, but that bears repeating, is that I have a very reliable professional team of editorial advisors with whom I am in consultation almost daily on different kinds of stories. These include very, very top-notch journalists, some of whom are on our paid payroll. Jake Bernstein, for example, on our paid payroll. Managing editor, some of whom, Michael Waldholtz, former Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter for the Wall Street Journal, Pam Fine, a top-flight editor from various papers around the country. These people help guide the choices that I make. I may have an impulse. I may ask them, what do you think? How would you handle this story? That doesn't mean that they always agree with me, but we hash out the pros, the cons, the what ifs, the way to present a story. How do we identify a given individual? What do we say in the first paragraph? What do we say in the second paragraph? These are very tactical, well thought out decisions. And I think we have to accept, when you're running a newspaper that has 15,000 readers and you're writing about somebody who has been a public figure, and some might say a controversial public figure in the community, you're going to have all kinds of reactions. And that is something I accept. I hope what our readers and listeners can accept is that we're doing our best, right? We really, really try to be impartial and to toe the middle of the ground, right? To really report out the facts of the story.
Would we have published this story if Joseph Dalu had not been involved in that Israeli-Gaza situation last May?
I think we would have, because he is the owner and known in the community for his ownership of Le Petit Bistro, a very well-respected and beloved by many restaurant in Rhinebeck. It is a complicated story, though, because it's a little hard to say, what would you have done if? Because that isn't the if, right? That's not the constellation of symptoms or issues that we're dealing with, right? So it's hard to kind of walk back something and say, well, what if this hadn't happened? Because it has. So it informed our decision. But I think what I was going to say a minute ago is it raises a little bit of a complicated point, because the issue, the action that took place that led to the arrest was not something he did in his capacity as the chef and owner of Le Petit Bistro. It's something that happened in his private life. So that actually is what I was turning to our advisors about. Does this warrant a story? Another complaint that we got was some people felt that we did more with this story than we do with other state police stories. And that is absolutely true, right? Some state police press releases warrant 2 paragraphs. Some warrant nothing. We get many, many press releases during the course of a day. And some warrant a full-on feature story, right? Or news feature in this case. So we are juggling all day, every day, how to cover, what we cover. And we're not going to always get it right for every reader. And I hope that doesn't cause readers to say, well, we're just not going to read the Daily Catch. But of course, that's their choice, right? If they feel that a woman last week said, our headlines are sensationalistic. Well, I don't know. So are the New York Post in some cases. Do you not read the New York Post? They're an excellent newspaper in many, many ways. So some people may not like our headlines. They may like a more staid approach. But this is the paper. This is the personality of the paper. We've won awards. We've won major grants. We've grown our circulation. So we're doing something that is appealing not just to our readers, but to the professional sphere in which we circulate. And those are the answers that I have to, the people and the readers and the needs that I have to answer to as the editor-in-chief and the founder of the paper.
So we'll keep following the Dalu story as it moves ahead. Let's stay in Rhinebeck and move on to our next topic, which is about transportation. Mayor Gary Bassett is proposing a very interesting program called Ride Beck. That's RIDE/Beck. What is Ride Beck?
Yeah, and it's a pun, of course, on Rhinebeck, which is, I think, kind of adorable. So Gary Bassett is proposing what's called a microtransit system. And this would be an on-demand system. So it wouldn't be like a van that's running around the village. You'd call, it would be available, I think it's 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, operating essentially during business hours. And you can call, and if you live in the village, it will take you to places like Top Supermarket and the Northern Duchess Hospital. And we're told it will also pick you up, right? They're anticipating no more than a 15-minute wait. We'll see if that's the case. To get it off the ground, no pun intended, they need to have a total of $100,000, Gary Bassett told us. And
just real quick, to get in and out of Tops in 15 minutes is a tall order.
Right. Well, you wouldn't necessarily. You'd go to Tops, be dropped off, and then presumably call when you're ready to be picked up. So you could do a 1-hour grocery run. So they need $100,000 to run the program. And they have obtained, I believe it's a grant for $50,000 of it. So Mr. Bassett wants to find partners, including the partners I just mentioned, to underwrite some additional portion of it, right? Without that, as he said, we'll go broke. So it's a very interesting idea. Of course, my first question was, well, will it take people to the Amtrak station? And the answer is not yet, no. Now, we should mention that this is not the only microtransit project in Northern Duchess on the drawing boards right now. Red Hook is also planning a microtransit system, but it's slightly different. That plan is largely to help senior citizens, and it will be anchored to some extent at the Red Hook Senior Commons housing project, and we'll expect to be taking people to and from there. And they are getting an electric vehicle van that is, to my understanding, going to have wheelchair accessibility capacity. What Gary has told us about Ride Beck is people will be expected to control all their own mobility issues. So it's not really for people who are using wheelchairs and have a lot of accessibility needs, at least not to start.
And then we should talk about the existing bus loop C.
We indeed should.
This won't be part of that at all, will it?
No. So, but it does come out of some of the controversies and difficulties with County Bus Loop C. So you may remember, Walter, two or so years ago, there was a threat that Bus Loop C was going to discontinue north of Top Supermarket, and it wasn't going to come into Tivoli and Red Hook at all. and a group of people rallied to save the northern end of Bus Loop C. Now, Bus Loop C runs, I believe, 6 days a week, not on Sundays, and it runs from roughly 6:45 in the morning when its first run starts in Poughkeepsie, and it runs until about 10 o'clock at night.
And it goes up
roughly every hour, roughly.
It goes up Route 9, right?
Up Route 9, and then it cuts over because it goes over to Tivoli. So I believe it cuts over and goes up Route 9G for the final leg. And then it turns around in Tivoli and comes right back down its same route. But then there are some large gaps in the middle of the day. I think there's a 2-hour gap at one point in the day. So one of the ideas of this new microtransit that Mr. Bassett is proposing is to allow people to hook on to that, right? Like it's possible you could come up maybe from Poughkeepsie, go to get off at Top Supermarket, then pick up a van, come into the village. So I don't know all the use cases for it, but you may be able to link up some parts of County Loop C with small operations in the village of Rhinebeck. But it's all to be a standalone, self-contained, standalone microtransit operation.
But it comes to your home, picks you up, and takes you to predetermined locations.
That's right. I'm not sure if you'll be able to ask it like, I don't really want to go there. I want to go to this building, or I want to go to Rudy's, which is not on the list, or I don't know how that's going to work. And I'm not sure they have figured out all the logistics of that.
It could be, and there's going to be no charge for it, right?
There's going to be no charge for it, which is why they need money to underwrite it.
It could be wildly successful for some people who need to get around.
Could be amazing. I think the biggest question is, how many can they serve? They expect to serve dozens of people a week. And will they be able to dovetail it and make the timing work for folks? It's a lot of logistical details. They're planning to have a contractor run the operation for them. They're going to run it themselves.
Yeah, good. So we'll follow that story. Okay, it's now time for Ask Emily M. Walter. And I'm going to go first this time, Emily, if that's okay.
Yes, you go first.
So we published a really wonderful story this week called Mornings at the Mobile, about a group of men who gather every morning at the Mobile station in Rhinebeck on Route 308, and it generated a lot of wonderful positive reader response. I have 2 questions for you. How did we come upon that story, and how did we decide to frame that story the way that we did?
Yes, it's so fun to talk about how stories come to be. So I was actually invited to a donor's home for a tea, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 months ago. And the woman who hosted us had a number of her friends there. And somehow it came up in the conversation that there was this group of men who sit at the Mobile station every day. And I was like, tell me more. That sounds like a great story. So it must have been in the late fall, because we then started to go over there. We sent a reporter over there, and we couldn't find the Mobile men. And we heard that in the winter, I think it was on a winter day, in the winter they don't gather. Or they don't gather there. We couldn't figure out where they were. So we dropped the story. We figured we'll eventually figure it out when it's warmer. But then a couple of months ago at the Rhinebeck Auto Show, I ran into the man who runs the fire department, Brian Knapp, and somehow I was talking to him, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'll have to tell the guys about it tomorrow at the Mobile." And I was like, "What?" Now I've got my connection. So I said, "That's fantastic, because we haven't been able to figure out where they are." And he said, "Oh no, we're back. We're back. We came back after the winter. We're all back." So then I asked our reporter, Elena Gastaldo, if she would go over there and break into the group and see if she could do a story. And yeah, you ask how we frame it. Well, to me, it was just a slice of life story, right? Talk to the men. She did say to me, how should she cover it? And I said, why don't you just go for a couple times and just be a fly on the wall? Just ask them if you can listen in and try to get a little bit of a feel of the gestalt of the group. What do they talk about? Because if you insinuate yourself too soon in a story like that, you're going to miss the story, because you become part of the story. That's not what we want. We want it to be behind the story, like looking in, almost like we're a drone supervising the group, looking in on the group. And eventually she pulled her story together, and it was just tell it straight,
I thought there were 2 interesting parts of the story. Number one is how Rhinebeck is changing so much around them. But this group of men remains constant, and they're very much the old guard of Rhinebeck. That's number one. And number two, I thought it was a very interesting portrait of how men socialize. And men, especially men at that age, mostly retired men, they socialize very differently than women do. And I'm not even sure we intended to capture that, but I think we caught it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I think that's true. I see how my own husband socializes, and yeah, it's a different game. And I think we often don't get a chance to tell stories like this. We probably don't try hard enough. And I think I'd like to try harder to tell these kind of slice of life stories. This is something that was a little more public, right? You can find these people, they're out sitting there. But there's stories like this all over the place, right under our noses. And the Daily Catch really aims to cover them as much as we possibly can.
Okay, your turn to ask me.
So I'm going to ask you a prediction question that has to do with the very last piece of news we'll throw out for our readers today. So, Walter, you may remember that we're going to have a repeat of the caucus. The Democratic caucus in Red Hook is going to be next Sunday. Doors will open at 4:30 p.m. They will close at 5:30 p.m., after which time there will be nominations and voting. I just wondered, I think it'd be fun to handicap it. What do you think's going to happen, Walter?
I think we're going to have even bigger turnout than before. Despite it being in the summer and people traveling in a summer Sunday, I think the turnout will be even greater because I think there's even more scrutiny around Red Hook and the boat club and what's going on. And I think people are probably very frustrated that we're doing a redo. So I think the turnout will be even greater.
Well, we'll see what happens, right? It's going to be a very interesting week, and I hope our listeners know that we will be right at it first thing Monday morning, ready to report out the news, and our producers will make sure that by Tuesday morning we have it all locked and loaded for people to read about.
And let's just do a quick recap for listeners. Where, when, and what's the timing implication of when you should arrive?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the caucus will open at 4:30 p.m. It's being held at the Red Hook High School Performing Arts Center. Parking can be a little tight over there, but so if you want to come, make sure you figure out your transportation. Doors will then close at 5:30 p.m. So you need to come within that 1 hour window. You need to be a registered Red Hook Democrat. And you then will cast your ballot depending on you'll have 2 votes for town board. You will also be casting a ballot for town clerk. There is not expected to be any opposition for that race. You will recall that at the first caucus in May, incumbent Christine Kane was up for re-election, or up for renomination, I should say. And Christina Ducharme, who runs the architecture firm that bears her name, and Kenny Migliorelli, the longtime Red Hook farmer, were running as well. Their names were put into contention. Kenny Migliorelli, then an independent, is able to run again. He plans to. I would expect those 3 names. We've asked Christine Kane if she intends to run again for the second round, and she has not gotten back in touch with us. So we're expecting, though, those 3. It's possible there could be some new names from the floor. And then at 5:30, the doors will close. There will be officers elected to run the caucus, a parliamentarian, I believe it's called, and someone to actually run the caucus, expected to be Sarah M. Bowden, the chair of the Democratic Committee in Red Hook. They will then run the caucus, and people will make nominations from the floor, seconds from the floor, speeches, and then we will have a vote. And the tally will then take place. People will be free to leave once they've cast their ballots. At some point, they will reopen the doors, and then the balloting will be tabulated, and we will hopefully have a result that night. So we'll see.
Sunday, July 20th, 4:30, the Red Hook High School Performing Arts Auditorium. Be there.
Correct. Be there.
So just a reminder, you can email us questions and we will answer them. You can email me at walter@thedailycatch.org, and we might answer one of your questions on a future podcast. This concludes episode 13 of The Catch Up. We hope you enjoyed listening. Thank you to Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hamoud at Radio Free Rhinecliff for their help producing today's episode. And thank you to Esther Martell for her help with editing. Emily, always a pleasure catching up.
Love doing it, Walter.